And I will be your conference operator today. At this time, I would like to welcome everyone to the CA Release Automation Community Webcast. All lines have been placed on mute to prevent any background noise. After the speaker's remarks, there will be a question and answer session. If you would like to ask a question during this time, simply press star, then the number 1 on your telephone keypad. If you would like to withdraw your question, press the pound key. Thank you. I would now like to turn the conference over to Mr. Yuri Shiner.
Yuri, are you on mute?
No, I'm not.
Okay, you have the deck now.
All right. How do I share? Oh, there you go. All right. So, hi everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Uli. I am the product manager of CA Release Automation, part of the product management team of the product formerly known as Nolio Release Automation. What we are going to do today is I'm going to show you a brief demo of the new release that we are currently working on. That's the 5.0 release. So I'm going to start with a very short deck, just outlining the new features and the motivation behind those features. Then we're going to jump into a live system so we can see a demo of the new product. And after that, I'll be happy to open the line for some Q&A. All right, so 5.0. The main themes we have behind this release is all around our manifest-driven deployment approach. This is our best practice where we train our customers to design their process logic and release execution logic in a generic way. So the logic is basically detached from the execution data. So you can use the same logic across different releases and different environments. The logic is being detached from the execution data, and the execution data we usually split it into 3 different areas. One area is the environment data. That's basically the machines in the environment where we want to do the deployment, the connection, and the relationship between those machines. And it also contains the environment configuration data, such as the relevant ports, cache locations, credentials to the services, connection strings to the database, and all those kind of release agnostic data that is attached to a specific environment, but change from one environment to another and remains the same across different deployments on the same environment. So this is one aspect of the execution data. The second one is the specific release information. And that's all those parameters and type of information that change from one from one release to another, from one deployment to another. Some prime examples for these type of information can be the list of bugs or enhancement requests that we cover whenever we deploy a specific version. Another type of an example could be which version of JDK we want to use, or JRE that we want to use when we deploy a specific version of our application. We can say that, for example, on version 9 of our application, we need to use JRE version 1.6. But when we upgrade to version 10 of our application, we want to use JRE 1.7. So the JRE version is a very good example, a very common example for release information. The last and obviously the core essence of the execution data is the set of artifacts that we want to deploy whenever we run a specific deployment. We're talking about the new content that we created using our CI tool, and we want to take all this content and push it across the different environments. So all these types of information, the release data, artifacts, and environment data, is what we call the execution data, and we detach it from the deployment logic. So whenever we want to deploy a specific content on a specific environment, one or more environments, we can have the generic deployment logic associated with the relevant release information and have a concrete deployment plan that we can run on multiple environments. So that's the manifest-driven deployment, and we call it a manifest-driven deployment because all these type of information resides on external manifest files, usually on XML or INI structure. So it's a very good approach, and we made it much easier to follow in 5.0, where we actually took away all the heavy lifting of writing down all those manifest files and writing logic that knows how to parse and get the information from the manifest files. And the system basically gets all the data automatically and associates the relevant information with the right attributes in each step of the release. And we will see that in our demo. We also improved the way we loop over multiple instances. It's a very common thing to have an XML file that contains several instances of the same XML element. So instead of using XPath queries that iterate over those instances during the execution, you basically let the system iterate over those instances automatically and perform the relevant deployment logic on each given instance. And we're going to see all that in the demo shortly. So all the manifest data is now part of the product. You have full visibility with regarding the content of each release. You don't need to go into external manifest files. Another thing that we did is we had a huge uplift for our artifact management console. We actually introduced a new artifact management console where you can actually define the model of your artifact. You can define which type of artifact you have in your application, WAR, EARs, DLLs, configuration files, whatever you need, we'll see it in the demo. And then you can bundle specific artifacts, new content that was created probably on your CI tool, bundle all the artifacts into a specific artifact package that contains all the data, all the binaries that you want to use in a single deployment, and then use it as an input to the deployment and use exactly the same content across the different environments. So you have the assurance that exactly the same set of artifacts are being pushed to the various environments with the same logic, the same generic logic. We're doing a lot of nice things with all those artifacts, with the artifact package. We associate the relevant artifacts with the right fields. So, for example, all the jar files are being associated with the relevant Tomcat-related machines. All the DLLs are being associated with the relevant .NET machines, and etc. We'll see it in the demo as well. And we also gave a new mechanism that allows you to control the distribution of those artifacts into the agents, the machines where the deployment is going to take place. You can either cache them locally on the agents or on the execution server prior to deployment, so you do not need to waste precious time on retrieving the artifacts during the deployment time. You can basically do it beforehand, and then once you do the actual deployment, files are stored locally, either on the execution server or on the agent, so you save a lot of time. We also introduced some new reports. We're going to see that in the demo shortly. So Before we jump into the demo, just one more slide where I can graphically show you the motivation behind all the stuff that we are going to see in the demo. In a deployment, we actually identified 3 different modules that comprise a specific deployment. Each of these modules can be and should be defined separately, probably by different people and with different roles. And when we have a specific plan of a specific release that we want to deploy, we just take the relevant pieces from each of these modules and combine them to a specific deployment plan. So let's talk quickly about each of these modules and see how it's all being compiled together. The first module I would like to talk about is the application module. This is where you actually need to define the architecture of your application, which server types you have, and the connection between those server types. On top of that, you need to design those generic deployment logic, how you actually want to do a specific type of deployment whenever that's going to be needed. So you can define different processes, different templates for different types of deployments. For example, I can have a full application deployment and an incremental application deployment. It's just a generic one. It is not connected to a specific release or specific environment. And whenever I'll need to do a specific deployment, like a full deployment, I'm just going to take that piece, associate it with the relevant data, and have a concrete plan for a specific deployment. The other model is the environment model. This is where you actually define all the environment-related information. For each environment, you can define which machines you have and the configuration data relevant for that environment. This is where you define what is the port for the Tomcat, credentials to the Tomcat, and etc. So it's the same parameters, same attributes, but very likely different values for different environments. This is being defined by the environment admin because they know the values for all of those types of information. They have no notion of how to do a specific deployment and what is the content of each deployment, but the system takes the relevant environment data whenever we design or plan a specific deployment to a given environment. So we take the relevant environment data and use it in a specific deployment. Last but not least, it's the release data that we need to define. As I said, it's the release data, like the JRE example, JRE version that I gave, and also the artifact model. This is where we define what is the content of each release. What is the set of files, set of artifacts that we want to use whenever we design a specific release execution. This is, by most of our customers, being created automatically by the CI tool. For example, if you guys are using Jenkins as your build server, then every time you run a build, or the nightly build or ad hoc build being invoked by a specific developer, there is a new content. New files are being created, and you want to bundle them into a specific artifact package and then deploy them to your testing environment. So you can have multiple artifact packages. Each package is comprised of a content of a specific build, and the system can automatically associate the artifact package with the relevant deployment logic that knows how to deploy these set of artifacts. And later on, whenever we choose to which environment we want to deploy these set of artifacts, the system takes the relevant environment data, the machine, and the environment configuration, and you end up with a concrete deployment of that set of artifacts to the selected environment. Let's see how it all gets together. let's say that this is my promotion task model. I first want to start in the QA, then I want to push the same content to the staging environment and end up with the production. Very naive, of course. You can do much more complex things, but just for the sake of the simplicity, we use a very basic streamline. Now let's say that I created a new content that I want to push to the QA environment. So what I basically need to do is I need to take the generic deployment logic that is relevant for the content that was created by the CI tool. In this example, the full application deployment. This is the generic logic that tells how to do a full application deployment. We take the artifact package that was created, 5.0 in our example. It can be for a specific build, of course. And later on, we also associate it with the relevant environment data, the QA environment data. And that way, we deploy 5.0 content into the QA environment. Now, when we want to promote the 5.0 content into the staging environment, we basically want to use the same content and the same logic because it's the same files and we need to deploy them in the same way. We just need to change the environment data. We want to take the staging data instead of the QA data. So we have the same content, same logic. We just replace the environment configuration and we push the release, the content, to the staging environment by using the same logic and same content. Whenever we want to do that into the production environment, it's exactly like we did in the staging. We're using the same logic and same content. We're just replacing the environment data. We're now taking the production data, and we end up with the same content being pushed to the production. And in overall, we're pushing the same content across the different promotion tabs. So same logic and same data is being used across the different environments. The only thing that differs between those different deployments is the environment data, the machines, and the configuration data. So after we explain this in a very high-level note, let's jump into a live system and see how that works out in the actual product. Let me share my browser. All right. So we talked about those three different modules that are part of a specific release. Let's see how we basically define them in the 5.0 release and how we basically use them in a specific plan. So this is the new. Do we have a question? Let's see. No, sorry about that. What we see here is the environment configuration console, where we can actually set the values for all those release parameters and set different values for different environments. This is a new UI that we introduced. For the technical guys in the group, I can tell you that we have used the Angular.js and Bootstrap on top of that in order to write this new UI that you guys are going to see. It's a new platform, a new technology for web-based applications that was actually designed to support high volume of information. It has a lot of really cool stuff. We can definitely discuss this in another time. So, as I said, this is the environment configuration console where each environment admin can define the value for each release parameter. You can basically define parameters as either environment data or release data. So environment data is the type of information that changes from one environment to another, and release data is the data that changes from one deployment to another, but remains the same across the different environments. Okay? Now we are focusing on the environment configuration console. So here we can basically, as an environment admin, define the values for each environment. As the environment admin, I see here the application robot store that I have created, and we can see that I have two different environments. So if I am selecting the QA environment, on the right panel, I can see all the parameters that were marked as environment parameters, grouped by folders and any other way you want to group your parameters. If we jump into the Tomcat folder, we can see that I have a Java location parameter that was marked as an environment data, and we can see that that is the value for the QA environment. If I go into the application parameters, I see that I have another Tomcat-related parameter, that is the Tomcat location, and that is the value for the environment, for the QA environment. I also have some database-related parameters here. If I will drill into it, I can see DB password, schema, and user. Those are obviously really good examples for environment data. I can set up all the values here for the QA environment, and the system will basically use it whenever a deployment is going to be run on the environment, on the QA environment. I think we have a question. I'll answer that shortly. If I will jump into another environment, the staging environment, we can see that we have the same structure because it's the same parameters, but the values for these parameters can change, I should say, on the staging environment. If I will go into the application parameters, you can see that I also have here the Tomcat location parameter, but the value of the Tomcat location here is C/Tomcat staging. While I was on the QA environment, and let me select exactly the same place, Tomcat location, the value is obviously related to the QA environment. So I just defined here the environment data, and we will shortly see how the system actually uses this information whenever we deploy the release to the QA environment in this case. I think we have one question, so let me just have a look. All right, we have a question here. What are the different differentiators between CA Release Manager via Webcast to a product? Can these parameters be tokenized? All right, so this session is all about 5.0. So I'm not going to focus on any differentiators aspects between us and other competitors. However, around the token, the tokenized of parameters, this is definitely something that you can do. You can create tokens and replace them automatically whenever, for example, you have a configuration file that is a generic across the different environments, and on a given environment, you want to replace the tokens with the right values. So the answer is yes, you can very easily do it in 5.0. All right, so this is the environment aspect, and this is one module of a release. Let's jump into the other module, which is the generic deployment logic. Okay, so I'm sure you guys know our template capabilities, where you can design generic deployment logic. Let's see how we have improved that area as well. So now you can define a template category, which is a container for multiple templates, multiple deployment templates that reuse the same content. That means if, for example, you have a full deployment that contains 5 different steps that you want to run in a specific deployment, and you also have an incremental template that uses only 3 steps out of those 5, you don't need to redesign the same steps for the different templates. You can define those steps once, and then create multiple deployment templates using the same set of steps. Let's jump into the template category and see it for yourself. So what we basically see here is that I have one deployment template. We call it a scratch deployment. It's basically a full deployment template. You can see here the deployment steps. These are the set of steps, the processes that I basically want to invoke whenever I want to have a full deployment on a given release. As I said, all those steps are generic. They are not associated to a specific environment or to a specific release. If, for example, we will jump into the deploy war process, we can see that I don't have any artifacts here because I don't know which artifacts I need to deploy. This is part of a specific release execution, and the artifact will be associated automatically whenever I will have a new artifact package. If I will go into the environment tab, I can see that the deploy war step basically use an environment parameter. This is the Tomcat location. Obviously, when I do a deploy war to a Tomcat, I need to supply the Tomcat location. But at this point, I do not know the value of the Tomcat location because it changes from one environment to another. Whenever I'll decide to deploy the war into a specific environment, the relevant Tomcat location will be used here automatically. And we're going to see that really shortly. So I have here the list of steps that I want to use on a scratch deployment. I also can define a post-deployment steps that I want to run after the release is finished. This is where I want to run some tests, send some notifications, tear down the environment if I need, or anything else I need to do after the release has finished. Now let's see how we can basically create another template. It's very easy. You just click the new one. Let's say, Webcast. Sorry about that. Webcast. Deploy. All right. Now I have a new template, and it's very easy to basically now just reuse the same set of steps that were used in the scratch deployment. So, for example, if the first thing I want to do is to deploy WAR, I just need to drag it. Then I can, remove some temp files, and at the end, what I want to do is to close the relevant tickets that were opened and this specific release is going to address. I drag it right here. I can say that I want to close the ticket only after I have deployed the WAR. And now I have another template that I can use later on specific releases. Okay, that's cool. So I have the environment data, right? And I have the generic templates, the generic logic that I can use across different releases and different environments. Let's have a quick look into our new artifacts model, and then we can combine all the information together. So, as I said, a new artifact management console where you can define the structure of your artifacts. We have in my application, I have EAR files, HTML files, and WAR files. This is a part of my model. And if, for example, we will select the WAR artifact type, I can see here on the right all the different WAR files that I have in my application. It doesn't mean that I need to deploy each of these artifacts in every deployment. It's part of my model. This is how this is the architecture of my application. So on the WAR types, I can see that I have business logic, command, site, and report. These are the 4 different WAR files that I have in my application. You can associate each file to a specific server type, and you can set some values for predefined attributes. For each WAR file, you obviously have a directory, a relative path inside the Tomcat server that you want to deploy the new WAR into it. So you can set all this data here, and the system uses it automatically whenever you decide to deploy a specific artifact during a deployment. If we drill into a specific artifact, let's pick the repulse. Obviously, there can be multiple binaries of the same WAL, because every time the CI tool runs, it ends up with a new revision, a new version, I would say, of the given artifact. So if we go into the repulse list, we can see here all the different versions of the repulse WAR. These are the different binaries that were created for the repulse. You can store each version in Know Your repository, in the RA repository, or you can store it in any external repository that you want to, and we know how to automatically retrieve the data from the repository the artifact from the external repository and distribute it to the relevant machine. So we have created the model. Obviously, you can automate everything I'm just showing you right now. We have a very rich set of REST code that can actually automate that, but I'm just showing it to you for so you can see the new stuff. And now, after we have defined those different artifacts and different versions of artifacts, we want to bundle specific binaries into a specific artifact package. So the artifact package, as you can see here, is a set of artifacts that you want to deploy together. What I basically did here is I actually created an artifact package for specific build execution. So you can see here that the content of build 21, that would be the build that I'll use. Sorry about that. And you can see that the content of build 21, you can basically see that I have one HTML file and 4 different WAR files. Each file, each HTML or WAR file is a specific binary that I want to deploy. I can go to different artifact package, and I can see that I have different versions of the same artifact. I see that we have a question whether I can add a manual step to a template. The answer is yes. You can add a manual step. You can write some predefined strings that will pop up in the string in the UI once this step is being invoked. For example, please check that all the scripts were executed successfully, and then you can either confirm the success or the failure of that manual step. Moving back into our demo. So we saw the content of the release, that's the artifact package, and the environment data and the generic processes. Now let's see how that all gets compiled together in the release. Before we jump into that, let me just show you an additional slide that outlines the combination of all those types of information. So we were right here. Now let's see how we can take all these information, combine it into a specific deployment, okay? So let's say that I have 2 different templates, right? A patch template and a full template. And I have 6 different environments I want to run the deployment on these environments. So what I basically need to do, I need to take the template and I need to associate it with a specific release content, okay? I have a release data for 3.5 and I have the release data for 3.5.1. The release data, as I said, is the release-specific parameters and the artifact package. Once I associate the release data with the template, I end up with a deployment plan for each of the content that I have provided. So I have a deployment plan for 3.5 and a deployment plan for 3.5.1. A deployment plan is a combination of the content and the logic on how to deploy and how to use this content. If, for example, I have a deploy war generic step that knows how to deploy selected set of WAR files, now I am actually associating the deploy WAR step with a specific set of WAR files that this step needs to deploy whenever it will run on a specific environment. So a deployment plan is the combination of the content and the logic. It does not have any environment notion. It's totally agnostic to environment, and the logic behind it is that once you want to deploy a specific deployment plan to a given environment, you just need to select the environment, and the system automatically associates the environment data with the deployment plan, and you have a concrete deployment for the same content with the same logic for each of the environments that were selected. So you can see that we have deployed the 3.5 content to the QA1, QA2, and staging environments. The only difference between those three deployments is the environment data, because we use the same logic and the same content, same set of artifacts. We just associated the relevant environment data with each deployment, with the same deployment plan, end up with the same results across the different environments. So you have the assurance that once you have deployed the release, the content, to the QA environment, whenever you will promote the release to the next environment, we will use exactly the same logic and the same content. If for some reason, and there are multiple reasons to do that, you want to use different logic for different environments, you can actually do that quite easily. If, for example, on the staging environment, you have a load balancer that you want to support and you don't have it in the QA, you can have that set up in the template, and the system knows automatically how to use the relevant steps in the relevant environment. Okay? So what we basically see here is that how we actually combine all this type of information together. We have the template, we associate it with the release data, we have a deployment plan, and we can associate the deployment plan with the environment data to deploy the same content across the different environments. Now let's jump back into the system and see how it looks in the product. All right, so we have the artifact package. Let's see the list of the deployment plans that I have created, and let's create a new one and run it on the QA environment. So this is the new screen of the deployment plan. And what we basically did here is, obviously, there are going to be a lot of deployment plans because we already have customers using it, and every time a developer runs a build or on the nightly scheduled build, a new package, a new artifact package is being created, and we have plugins, Jenkins, Hudson, TeamCity, and TFS to automatically create a deployment plan from a given set of binaries. And obviously, you're going to end up with a lot of deployment plans per a specific team. So what you can basically do here, you can group specific set of deployment plans to a specific project. Projects can be either a service pack that you are working on or different sprint iterations that the Scrum teams are associated with. So each sprint, in my example, contains all the deployment plans, all the content and the logic that were created on a specific sprint. So I can see here all the content that was created on sprint number 2. I can just select the environment I want to use to deploy this content. I see that we do have some questions. Let me just answer them as well. Yeah, there is a question. Do we have an integration with ServiceNow? Yeah, we do have an integration with ServiceNow, so you can associate a deployment to a specific ER defined in ServiceNow, and only after the ticket is approved in ServiceNow, the release can actually run. There is another question whether we have an integration with Artifactory. And yes, you can store artifacts in Artifactory, and whenever we need those files, whenever we need to deploy those files, we just pull the artifacts from Artifactory and distribute them to the relevant machines. Okay, let's create a new deployment plan. Let's call it a Webcast deployment plan. We just need to select the template we want to use. Let's use the Scratch deployment. We can supply a build, and we're nearly done. Now I click Save. This is the Webcast deployment plan that I have created. Now we have a pre-planned step that can basically automate everything. I'm just going to do manually in the UI so you can see what we have done. And it's important to understand that we're not expecting any customer to go into the product to create a deployment plan, to define artifact package, and to run a deployment on one or more environments. We have a very rich set of REST codes and plugins that can automate the entire process. So whenever you have a new build that has just finished, you can just automate the creation of the artifact package and the deployment of that package across the different environments. So, as I said, we have a deployment plan, and now what we need to do is we need to associate the deployment plan with the content. Let's start with the artifact package. We need to decide which set of artifacts we want to deploy. So we just need to select a package. Now we have a clear visibility with regarding what is the content of the deployment plan, which files are going to be used. Now let's go into the deployment steps. Okay, and now we can see exactly the same steps that were defined in the level of the template. At that point, they were very generic. Steps, but now these steps are being associated with the content, with the artifact package. If we go into the deploy war steps, for example, we can see that on the environment data, we still don't know the value of the Tomcat location because we haven't selected an environment yet. But once we will select a specific environment, the Tomcat location will be used automatically. However, once we go into the artifact tab, we can see the content of the artifact package, and it's not only that, we actually automatically associated between the relevant artifacts and the different tiers in the application. So in that example, we can see that 3 WAR files were mapped to the front tier, while one WAR, the report WAR obviously, was mapped into the reporting tier. So the front tier was associated with 3 WAR files, and the reporting tier was associated with one WAR. And that basically means that whenever we decide to which environment we want to deploy the release, this WAR file, the report WAR file, for example, will be deployed on all the machines that are associated with the reporting tier. So you don't need to do any sophisticated logic or artificial intelligence that knows how to map between different artifacts and the relevant machines. The system does all that by itself. Okay, once you supply an artifact package, it's being used across the different processes, the different steps. If we go into update HTML files, for example, I can see that I have a front tier, and it's also going to get, in addition to the WAR files, an HTML file. We automatically associated the HTML file with the frontier server type. Another type of release data that we have discussed is the release data, not only the artifact, but also the data. And an example that we have used is the closed tickets, right? We said that every release can be associated with one or more tickets or YAR. What we have here, if we will drill into that, we can see that we have a release data, which is a list of tickets that I want to close, that I want to verify during the deployment of that release. At this point, it's still generic. You can see here that I don't have any data. I can type it manually, or I can provide a release manifest data that the system will automatically use, parse, and associate with the relevant parameters. Let's do it. We have here, a manifest action button where you can generate the manifest, so you don't need to define the manifest file by yourself. The system automatically generates the manifest file for you, and then once you fill out the information, you can load the manifest back, and the data is being populated to the relevant parameters. Let's load the manifest file that I already created. Now we're loading the manifest file. The system automatically verifies the structure and the integrity of the data and associates the values with the relevant parameters. Now if we go into the close tickets step and go into exactly the same place, we can see that now we have two different tickets that we are verifying during the execution of the release. This is the data that came from the manifest file. Okay, and as I said, you can automate the entire thing. We're not expecting anyone to go here and do that for every release that they're doing. Cool. So we have the content, that's the artifact package. We have the logic on how to deploy the artifact package. The only thing that we need to do is to deploy it on a specific environment. So what we can basically do is we just need to create a deployment. We give it a name, Webcast deployment to QA. We select the environment we want to use. Let's use the QA at this for this demo. We can use all the server definitions that were defined in the product, the mapping between the server type and the machine in the QA environment, or we can do some manual or process-based changes if you want, and we can start the deployment automatically. For this example, I will not do a complete deployment because I want to show you the different stages you have in the deployment. Obviously, I can just click a save now and the release will run. All right. So now we have a deployment to the QA environment. We see here the content, the artifacts. We also see here the steps that we are going to use during the deployment. At this point, since we have created, we have selected a specific environment, we also have the environment data being associated automatically with the relevant environment parameters. Okay, if we select the deploy var, which use then the Tomcat location, we can see that the Tomcat location has a value, and that is exactly the same value that the environment admin has used for the QA environment. Once we decide to run the release on another environment, the Tomcat location value will change. Okay, so we have everything. Let's just run it. Obviously, as I said, you can do everything in one click, but let's see the cool stuff that we have added. These are the different stages that the release will go through during the deployment. The first thing that we're doing is validating the integrity of the data. We make sure we have machines for the different server types. We have data for all the release and environment data, and we're fine. Then the next thing that we are doing is we need to distribute the artifacts into the different machines. And that is a very important feature that we have added. Here you can basically control when you want to distribute, to push the files into the machine. And it's very common that you don't want to waste a precious deployment time of grabbing the artifacts from Artifactory and then moving it all around the world until it reaches the production. So you can distribute the files into either the execution server or to the agent and do that outside of the maintenance window. You can basically do that before you need to do the actual deployment. So you do that beforehand, and then once you do the actual deployment, you have the file cached locally on either the agent or the execution server in case you cannot do anything on the agent outside of the maintenance window. And later on, whenever you are allowed to run the deployment, you click Run and do the deployment. I have some questions here regarding automating all that stuff. And obviously, what you can basically do is you can automate the entire process via REST code or the different plugins that we have. So you can, in one single REST call, you can create a deployment, run it on a specific environment, push the files into the machine, and do the deployment at a later point. That bearing in mind that you already have the files being cached locally on the machines or the execution server. So we have REST APIs for all the operations I have just showed you, and we also have plugins for all the common CI tools that saves you the usage of those REST calls because it basically automates the entire process. During deployment, let's see which other questions that I have. Yeah, I have a question here. I showed that you can export the XML, and there was a question whether you can do the other way around, whether you can import the data to update the template. You can do that. I showed you how you can do it on the level of the deployment, but you can go to each template and generate a manifest file and load a manifest file with data as well. Okay, we have finished the deployment successfully. We used the content and the logic to deploy it on the QA machine. Now the only thing we need to do is run the post deployment. This is where we do some unit tests. As I said, you don't need to click every time you pass a specific phase. You can automate the entire stream. Okay, so now after I have deployed the data into the QA environment, I can easily go back into the deployment plan and do exactly the same thing to different environments. I can create a deployment, select a different environment, and the same thing will happen on the staging environment. We're going to use the same logic, same content. The only thing that will change is that the system will take the new environment data, the staging environment data, and associate it with the relevant environment parameters. I'll just jump into a nice report. We don't have time to the second report. I'm just going to use this one. This is a new deployment pipeline report that we've added, where you can basically see the content and the status of the environment based on the applications and the projects. I have used sprints in one example. Here we can see that we are using different versions, different service packs in that example. So for each application, this is the lease application. I can see the project that I am responsible to. You can decide which project you want to see in your own personal view. and you can see all the environments that are currently being deployed with content from that service stack. And you can see exactly which build is currently in each environment. If there is a problem with the latest build, you can see the status here. If there is a user input you need to provide, like a manual step require your attention, you get a notification here. And if a specific release is currently running on a given environment, you can click here the More window, get some additional information, and see the progress of the release in just one page. So you have a very good overall dashboard that shows you the status of each project and each environment that are part of the project. So we have just a couple of minutes for Q&A. So Kimberly, may I ask you to open the line for questions, please?
At this time, if you would like to ask an audio question, please press star, then the number 1 on your telephone keypad. We will pause for just a moment to compile the Q&A roster. And there are no audio questions at this time.
Okay. All right. So, guys, thank you very much. And if you have some more questions later on, feel free to reach out to me. I'm available via the community and on emails as well. I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
This concludes today's webcast. You may now disconnect.
Thank you, and bye-bye.